right. You're listening to Do It Yourself Music Appreciation, a show where three old buddies, myself, Benny, my boy Dion, and my boy Gary, we reconvene each week. We analyze, we deep dive, and we appreciate a different album each week. So far, we've really run the gamut of hip hop. We've gone from, pretty old school to pretty underground to somewhat more recent, very commercial, but very underground. And now we're going to the essence, one of the great granddaddies of hip hop. We're going to talk about Boogie Down Productions, Criminal Minded. Gary, love the pick this week, man. Really was a fun week of listening for me.
This is a good one.
My hip hop.
I'm glad you liked it.
My nerd, brain started really taking some lessons on this one.
I need to know. I need to know, what did you learn? What did Benny learn, who knows everything about music?
I mean, it's interesting, man. This is a great. I was floored by the pick last week because it's an album that, have I heard it before this? Of course I have. I, as someone who needs to know everything about the thing that I love, right? Like, I always have to know where it started. So I've definitely heard this album before, but, probably the last time I gave it a listen was, in my early 20s, and I am no longer in my early 20s. Like, it was a long time ago. Like, over a decade ago was the last time I really listened to this one. And, so production credit, I always, for those who don't know, Boogie Down Productions is a rap group where really the MC is the great almighty KRS-ONE, the guy who revolutionized rap music.
Living legend, and that's not tossed around lightly. No. That's like, the man is a living legend.
A guy who birthed, and we'll get into it more when we talk about the songs on this album, but he really showed the way and birthed the proper battle rap, a rap where you're going at someone personally. He made it the competitive nature that rap always really, it started as that, as like, no, I'm better than you. No, you're whack. I'm not whack. You know what I mean? And it was, rap has always been competitive, but he really was, he designed the battle track, on this album. You see two perfect examples of how to make a song, that goes at someone else, a diss track, so to speak. So
if you go to the Wikipedia entry for diss track, the very first, the one they credit as having the first diss track ever is on this album.
Right.
So that goes to tell you all you need to know about that.
and again, people were making jabs at each other. There was battles going on in clubs. You know what I mean? But really, before KRS did it with these two songs, which is South Bronx and The Bridge Is Over, it was more about, no, I'm going to do my routine better than you could do a routine. I might throw a jab at you, in a battle, but it's really about who could do their routine better. Whereas he took it personal. You know what I mean? And he made these isolated tracks going directly at a certain, part of another borough, and we'll get into it again. But just so this is credited as the first street album, and the first album in hip hop, which, it's not like a shining moment, but it's the first album to show the musicians with guns on the cover.
Yep.
And it is, if you want to talk Biggie, if you want to talk Wu-Tang, if you want to talk NWA, actually, I think NWA might have already. So let's talk. I don't know when
around the same. It's around this time.
Well, let's talk New York street hip hop. It can all be traced back to this album, and so it's KRS-ONE and DJ Scott LaRock, who tragically only appeared on this album because he was murdered shortly after this album was released.
5 months after, something like that.
So Boogie Down Productions was DJ Scott LaRock and KRS-ONE, which stands for Knowledge Reigns Supreme Over Nearly Everyone. And, so this was the birth of that, street, somewhat violent rap in New York. And what happened is, after Scott LaRock passed away, several other albums were released under Boogie Down Productions, but the one common thread was KRS-ONE. So that's the intro. He changed a lot over the years. This was actually his by far most violent, raw, and aggressive album. As the years went on, KRS assumed the role of the teacher and the spiritual advisor.
Mm-hmm.
Funnily enough,
and that starts here. Like, you know,
totally,
we'll get into that, but yeah.
Totally.
But sorry, what were you gonna say?
He gets away from the more vulgarity, and he as time went on, he evolved into this wanting to bring people together, not tear them apart. You know what I mean? And he actually has an album, funnily enough, called Spiritual Minded. I don't know if you knew that, but
I did not.
That was way after.
He made a lot of things.
Yeah.
He made a lot of things. He kept making music. I think he's continuing to make music.
And you know, without a doubt, I don't know if we're going to mention this when we really get into the album. I have to say, I witnessed him rock live. Me and you, Dion. We were at Rock the Bells one year, and Rock the Bells. I have mixed feelings about hip hop festivals because, quite frankly, as much as I love hip hop music, I think it's best heard on record. There's only maybe one or two artists I've seen where I'm like, this is as good as the record, and that's the Roots and Royce the 5'9". I've never been to a hip hop show besides those two where I'm like, they're doing it as good as I hear it on the record. I've just never experienced that at a hip hop show. So
my ears aren't as snobby.
So when we go to Rock the Bells, it's great to see these artists, but a lot of them are yelling. A lot of them you can't really hear the articulate nuances in their songs, and it's more about how much are they moving and how much are they shouting rather than how well are they doing these rap songs, right? It takes a back seat. Now we saw KRS, and it was like the king holding court. It was like a master at work. He had the main stage, and it was like a tribal movement. Everyone in that crowd was dancing and locked into where he was going, what he was doing. He controlled the crowd. You know, they say, MC, master of ceremonies, mover of crowds. He mastered that ceremony and moved the fucking crowd. It was a sight to behold. I don't know if you remember, Dion, some chick passed out right in front of us. Remember?
All right.
Just like all of a sudden, crack hits the floor.
Oh my God.
It was grass.
It was dirt.
Yeah. Was she overcome by the music, or was she
she was dehydrated and drunk, most likely. Yeah. But
Governor's Island in the middle of like August. It was
it was a weird experience. But again, watching him do his thing, and he never lost that battle mentality that we just spoke about. He was going at people on the other stage. He's going, man, some people over there, they're talking about being aggressive, but that's not what this is about. You know what I mean? Like he was going at people for promoting the wrong thing in hip hop at the same fucking festival. That is balls, and that is knowing that you are royalty, and that it's your authority. It's on your authority that you could say something like that. You know what I mean? So at any rate, that's who we're talking about. One of the gods of rap, one of the great granddaddies of rap, someone who reinvented the whole genre, or helped reinvent it at least. So this is his first album, and what a pick it was. So Gary, the pick was, it kind of caught me off guard because we were really, we just came from Kanye West, the almost the pinnacle of commercialized, successful, wealthy, on the radio, top of the newspaper, in the news rapper. I'm sorry, in the news. So forgive me, but someone who made headlines in the 2000s, someone who has amassed a tremendous amount of wealth from making music, to Boogie Down Productions, Criminal Minded, which it's a classic by absolutely a classic, and you can't deny that, but it's a completely, it's a left turn from where we just were, which to our credit, we've really taken many left turns, which eventually brings you around in a circle, by the way. But we zipped and we zagged between different areas of hip hop. So what made you decide to bring up Criminal Minded as our show this week?
Yeah, right on. Well, it started with that documentary with the hip hop, what was it called again?
Hip Hop Evolution.
Yeah, Hip Hop Evolution, which was excellent. And, it was the first time I have ever seen and heard KRS-One speak just casually, right? He's interviewed in this.
Yeah.
And I thought the dude was so just, I don't know. I mean, I didn't know he was still like, you hear a KRS-One mentioned in all this rap as kind of like a deity or somebody who's like, revered, there's a lot of reverence for him.
Sure.
And I just haven't heard his music for a long time, or didn't realize I had heard his music. Then I'm like, this guy's alive still. Okay. So you hear him speak and he's just so funny. And like, he's so eloquent and so, I don't know, he just knows how to tell a story that was so, that captured me, right? The way he started talking about one of the beats for his songs and just kind of introed it with his voice. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
He did this in the documentary, and I thought that was awesome. Like, I got to listen to this guy's music. This guy is awesome. This guy is a kind of wizard that I didn't know existed. So, and then, I listened to the album. This was about a year ago. I listened to it in full for the first time and loved it. But the underlying theme in this album that I've never seen anywhere else in music, that's similar to like our friendship, right? Is his genuine friendship with his DJ that he partnered with for this album, Scott LaRock. They have a genuine friendship. These guys are friends. They have songs kind of building each other up, or he builds up his the character of his DJ in like a superhero like way, just in the kind of silly, like half serious way that we build each other up, right?
Sure.
And like this kind of special, kind of friendship that withstands time and etc. Right? Like you could see that it was hilarious, it was sarcastic, it was like, a bit of I don't know. He went far out there, and it was just to be funny, and I don't know, I found that touching. I love the album especially because of that, and it carries a special charm.
It's funny, this album gets talked about a lot for what it did in its moment in time in hip hop, but it doesn't really get considered for the humor. I mean, I'm sure it's mentioned, but like, I don't know this album well enough to just spit lyrics off the top of my head, but he's very funny, on certain parts of this album.
I'm talking about there's a couple of, there's some really good storytelling throughout, like the 9mm Goes Bang.
9mm Goes Bang
is hilarious. And it's, it has an element of that where he talks about how his DJ, Scott LaRock, is just, he's either got a knack for trouble or he happened to be, in the spot, but he just showed up in a tinted out, BMW, like some kind of, bad guy type car. And apparently just cruising the streets in this car, this dude just looking for trouble. Like, I'm not sure what his character was actually like, except that he was, he was a social worker, and it was clearly, not like a criminal type dude cruising for trouble on the streets, but that was baked into the story, right? And the thing about him being a super hoe was also just baked into the story of this character that I don't know how likely it was that this was anywhere near true, but it was so funny.
And how about, I mean, you just mentioned super hoe. I mean, how many when you listen to this song, Dion, I'm going to ask you too, because you have a knack for this. How many different samples from this album have you heard in other people's albums?
But I thought you were going to go with this is that super hoe.
Yep.
Super sperm.
No, well,
that's what I was going to say. A lot of shit's sample super sperm.
So Scott LaRock chopped that up from Rapper's Delight. I forgot who said it. With my super sperm. Yeah, that's been chopped up a lot. But on this album, including He Is a Super, that is a sample that is used as a sample on Dead Bent by MF Doom on the first Doom album.
Right.
And you hear different elements. One thing I love.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
I don't know.
And if Ghostface uses that in on Supreme Clientele, doesn't he? Chain swing down to my torn meniscus. Doesn't that beat?
I'm not sure, but I love that's Apollo. Oh no, that's from the album Apollo Kids. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, Apollo Kids.
Yeah. That's the song with Busta Rhymes.
Yeah, I think it might be the same sample. We'll find out. Explore that later. But yeah.
So there's a tremendous amount of like people sample this album a lot. So a lot of people have taken like phrasings and like certain sentences that he says, like Mos Def. There's a few Mos Def songs where he's just literally saying what KRS has said already on this album, and it's totally like out of respect and to move. But as someone like me, I didn't, you know, until I sat down and paid attention, I didn't know they originated here. You know what I mean? So,
well, what's the one song that Black Star that the definition the song that they heavily sample is on this album, and it's a lot of lines, just like you said, a lot of lines are just homage.
I believe it is Superho.
Is it Superho?
I should have taken notes. I apologized, but we might have to chop this part up too. But I would love to find that, because there is the song definition by Black Star is literally that song, but chopped up into a newer. So you know the song 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Most after Talib Kweli. You know what I'm talking about?
That's this song, dude.
No.
That is just that is a surprise.
Check this out. Check this out. It is remix for P is Free.
Oh, there you go.
Song.
So the song remix for P is Free. Black Star actually took that essence of that song, and I believe most of that beat, and made it into Definition, which is a completely different track, but you could hear its elements in this song. The ground, you know, it was built from this, the bones of this song. So there's so many things, so many influences came from this album, and it just
absolutely
it expanded far and wide. There's an interview with MC Ren from NWA. Where he says this was his album. This was the album that really opened his eyes to how street you could get, and so all the way on the other side of America, this was influencing. And this is at a time, this dropped, you know, hip hop was coming alive, but there was no hip hop radio stations. It was, you had a few hours in the middle of the night. You had, you know, Mr. Magic, and you had a few other hip hop radio shows, but there was no Hot 97. There was no,
at least not for another 5 years or something like that.
Exactly. And so hip hop wasn't mainstream just yet. You had Run DMC break out and make waves, and it was becoming mainstream.
It was on the come up. It was definitely on the come up. Run DMC would have just signed with Adidas, like things like that were already started to happen, but people weren't quite ready for or no, not that they weren't quite ready. They just hadn't seen anything like KRS just yet.
Totally. So that's what I mean. This is you could follow the roots. If a hip hop is a tree and you follow it down to the roots under the ground, one of its big motherfucker roots that breaks the sidewalk and it will not be removed from the earth is this album. It's interesting. So Gary, when you suggested this one and I went back and listened to it, I remember having the same thought when I first discovered it, although it was the same thought, but from a different pair of glasses, let's say, because I've grown up a lot and I appreciate, I don't know about you guys, but as I age, my the road that I walk is much wider in terms of accepting different genres and styles of music. I was, when I first heard it, I was like, yeah, I get it. It's important, but I'm not going to listen to this because it's a very sparse production. It's drums, it's bass lines, and maybe a keyboard sample, but it's so sparse and so the word is not rudimentary, but bare.
Are you surprised by how much fun you had with it though?
Yes.
Given how sparse and simple it is?
Totally.
That was the surprise for me too.
It breaks hip hop down to its bare bones essences: drums, bass, and cleverness. And cleverness
as an ingredient.
It's almost tribal in the the 4/4 beat reigns supreme, and it's just it's very it doesn't have melody. We'll put it that way, right?
You know what it is when I listen to this album, when I hear it, and this is the thing that kept permeating in my brain every time I heard it. This half of the songs on this album, when you first hear the first few seconds of them, the first thing you think of is hip hop. I know it sounds kind of vague or whatever, but I don't know how else to describe it. When Poetry, the first track, when those first few seconds pop on, the first thing I think is oh, this is classic hip hop. There's no doubt in my mind. And this what you call it, the Bridge Is Over. That beat, that's one of the beats that I think when I in the reverse, when I think of hip hop as a thing. You have a few things that always come to the front of your mind. I feel like the beat for The Bridge Is Over is one of those things that just since I was a kid, you think hip hop, you hear that boom 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 like that's just like, you know, ingrained in your skull. Like it's all in this album. Like that's what it is. Just like this album, it's just pure hip hop. Like that's I don't know how else to describe it.
Totally, and you know, it's such an overused statement, and people don't do it much anymore. But when we were in high school, MCs used to say, "I am hip hop." Right? That was like you know what I mean? Like that's a declaration that what you do is hip hop in the purest form, right? How many times have you heard that? I am hip hop. I used to have a shirt that said I am hip hop. Do you remember that?
I think so.
I would wear it proudly.
I think so, yeah.
But like, you know what I mean? He's one of the few people, KRS, when he says, and he said it before, I'm sure. I don't know, but if he said I am hip hop, you go, yeah, you're right, motherfucker. You're hip hop. You know what I mean? Like you are. Like there's no doubt. So the sparse production, right? I want to take a moment to talk about that because it's so. If you've never heard this before, if you're into hip hop music, you know, from the 2000s and even as far back as the 90s, if you know, but you haven't gone to the golden age, which the late 80s is considered the golden age of hip hop. If you haven't gone that far back, you might be startled. Quite frankly, if you've never heard something like this, you might be like, man, this is some bare bones shit. You know what I mean?
It's like someone like watching like Casablanca for the first time. It's like, whoa.
Totally. Just a few
black and white. What
the right. Yeah, right. Like, why am I going to be interested in this?
Exactly.
And just a few years later, literally just maybe 2, 3, 4 years later, the art of sampling had the skill and the art and like what you could do with sampling, which is, again, sampling is the taking elements from records, recording them, and then repeating them and making your own music from it, which is really, that's the origin of hip hop is, inner city schools lost the ability to, there was no more music programs in inner city schools. They took instruments away from the youth. So the kids from the Bronx and from New York wanted to make their own music, and they learned how to take records, record break beats, and add other samples to it and make their own music from pre-existing records. And that is the birth of hip hop, right? To a degree, that is really, when you trace hip hop back to its roots in the 70s, it was Kool Herc taking 2 records and chopping up 2 records to make his own music live for you to witness. And that's really the very origins.
Yeah, that was the single-celled organism that started it all.
Totally. The amoeba that was in 1977. I don't know for sure, but that's around when Kool Herc started doing something like that. 2 years later, you had the first ever single pressed and heard by the masses, which is Rapper's Delight. And if you think about it, Rapper's Delight, that's not even a sample. It's an instrumental track that was once a disco song. Yeah, and disco. They just remove it's disco, right? People don't really. A lot of people don't know that hip hop was birthed from disco.
Oh, heavily linked to disco. Heavily linked. Especially early hip hop. Look at the outfits and shit that these motherfuckers wearing. Like
they look like the village people.
They look like the village people, and that shit was cool. Like that shit was cool back then. Like to have sequins going all down your arms and like eye patches and like it's like I
can't wait for that shit to come back.
Yeah, it's basically already here. But
so real quick, in 1979. Rapper's Delight. It's just a disco instrumental, right? And then over the course of the 80s until this point, sampling became, it started with just drums, like chopping up a drum breakbeat, then adding a bass line. And this was literally shortly after sampling became the prime, again, a few years. There's no way, this is not the first ever sampled music in hip hop, but it broke free from the disco. This is so far removed from the disco elements that late 70s, early 80s hip hop was birthed out of, and it really helped shape the street sound, right? Drums, hard hitting bass, simple. And then a few years later, you have a Tribe Called Quest album that literally infuses all this jazz and all of these other sonic elements that were not in hip hop. And again, this was like right in the middle of that, right? Far away from just disco instrumentals, really starting to like make your own music with your own samples, your own drum, machine loops, and here's what you get, right? So that's what I wanted to talk about. It's just, if you're looking for something that's going to sound super polished, this ain't it. Even the DJ cuts are like off sequence, right? Like when he's scratching on certain, what's the song? It's one of the first songs. I have it right here. I believe Word from Our Sponsor, possibly, or Elementary, somewhere around there, where it's every time Scott LaRock scratches and comes back in, it doesn't even hit the 4/4-1. It's like offbeat. You know what I mean? And the whole thing sounds like it was thrown together in some guy's bedroom. It really does. But
that's what gives it that like sort of real like rawness. Like that's
Totally.
It's the same shit that
hungry people trying to make a name for themselves.
It's the same exact thing that happened 6 years later in Staten Island with Wu-Tang. And he's similar. You get that like raw sound. That's like, yeah, this shit ain't perfect, but that's what I love about it, is that it's not perfect.
It sounds gritty. It feels unpolished, and that's part of what makes it good. Dion, can we talk about storytelling for a second? Because that's the thread that is coming through from before this music to very much in this album, and some of the best storytelling that I heard. And also in future stuff, right? Like Left My Wallet in El Segundo, right? Came a little while after this, right? But like you hear it in all the songs that we love. And the storytelling that this, like, let's say that song 9mm goes bang.
and that, you know, but before we go on with that is going back to something we were just talking about 10 minutes ago. That's that kind of style that like we were saying, like if some, like, you know, 17-year-old kid who just got into hip hop like 3 years ago started listening to that flow is gonna shock the shit out of that person or that kid. Like, whereas for us, we're like, yo, that like brings us back to like, you know, even this like predates us. Like this shit came out when we were, you know, both, like, you know, 2 years old, but like we still have appreciation for this. But like that, like kind of like slow, like kind of like very deliberate, you know, on the beat, like every word, like is, you know, I love that shit. But like that's the kind of stuff that's like that's so far removed from this generation. But that's a whole nother.
Yeah, man. I mean, Gary, we do get it once in a while. Yeah, what's up, Benny?
Sorry. So I want to hear, like, so like we just heard it, right? He's telling a story. He's taking us through this experience, right? So like what is your, like, you know, what do you have to say about the storytelling here?
Yeah, well, here's an example in this song when he's talking about the knocking. He's like, I heard a knock. It goes wah wah wah.
Yeah.
But the way it sounded does not sound like any cop. And if it were a fiend, they'd ask me for a nick. But you know, it's actually, you just kind of, it's work. It's in the music, right? It's his voice really adds to it, and it adds to the story, the impact of the story. For me, I picture it, and I'm right there in the apartment. I'm seeing him duck because he's about to fire through the door, and like he's got, you know, it's just like a typical scene from like an 80s crime movie kind of thing. You could picture it, and totally, it's great the way he tells the story, and I think this kind of storytelling where he puts you right there carries through in a lot of his music. You know, even after this, I mean, especially after this album, he gets into some really humorous and detailed storytelling that reminds me of some of my favorite music from, you know, Notorious B.I.G., right? And anybody who tells a story about criminal activity that really puts you in, you know, right behind the eyes of the protagonist. It was cool.
And that's another thing this album is credited for doing, which I'm sure this is not the first raps. These are not the first rap songs to tell a story, right? Like, The Message came out in 1982 by Grandmaster Flash. And you know, 81, 82. And that, you know, that was an essay on the condition of New York City at the time. You know what I mean? So like, it wasn't the first topical rap music. But
for sure, and even in Rapper's Delight, it was, you know, there were anecdotes in there.
The whole dinner party part of Rapper's Delight is one of my favorite things. Ben,
and the extended version. Have you ever went over to a friend's house to eat and the food just ain't no good?
Say what? I mean, that whole thing is great. It's great. The kale pectate. He managed to include kale pectate in a rhyme, and it was successful. Are you fucking kidding me? In 1978.
So, you know, what this album and KRS's impact was, he showed you how well and how descriptive and how, you know, when you listen to KRS tell a story, you are at attention, you don't get lost, and it's almost like he has a beginning, a middle, and a resolution. He and did you hear that siren in the background?
Yeah.
Anyway, there's, you could, that's what I mean, where you could trace the roots back. So if you follow the roots up the tree in storytelling, a few years later, this is 87. So, by 95, you're going to hear Biggie tell some of the greatest tales ever told in hip hop.
I got a story to tell.
Same year, you're going to hear Raekwon tell some incredible freaking stories and then move on in his career as one of the greatest storytellers.
When did Rewind come up? When did Rewind
was
come out?
2001.
That was okay. That was much later.
But again, Nas, one of the
best story songs
ever.
One of
the greatest storytellers ever. If you want to trace the roots back, they're not gonna. I mean, you could trace them back to again the amoeba of Rapper's Delight, but really, it's rooted in this album. That storytelling, the gangster street tales started right here.
And what a voice to tell that story, man. Yeah. I think I always thought of KRS, especially after, listening to this album a bunch. I think of him as the original Dragon, like there's some of that. It's like just a big voice, right?
Authoritative
a big voice that uses humor, that like uses uses onomatopoeia and uses all these literary techniques to keep somebody plugged into the music.
You know what it is? Like I feel every time I hear KRS rhyme, I almost feel as if he's like he's putting his arm around me, and it's like just spitting knowledge to me. Like that's like the vibe I get every time I hear. It's like just like because he's a big like burly dude. So like I imagine just like like metaphorically, whatever, like, it's like, yo, brother, let me teach you something. Puts the arm around me, and then he starts spitting, remix of P is Free, or like, just, and especially that going back to that flow on 9mm, like, it's so like, it's just a matter of fact. It's like, it's no bullshit. It's like, yo, here's the story. I'm not trying to put any frills, whatever. Yeah, we were on the floor. I started shooting. So what? Like, I don't know.
And his voice is also like a wave of energy, right? It carries, in addition to the simple backdrop, right? Especially back then, his voice really is an instrument in the song, and it carries the song like a wave.
So much confidence. This is his first
confidence. Yes. Yeah.
This is his first album. His first single he probably recorded, let's say 2 years before that. Hip hop moved a lot slower back then. You know what I mean? You didn't have SoundCloud and Instagram. You didn't have overnight famous. You had to grind. You know what I mean? So and you could honestly, what I love about this album, you could also when I listen to these songs, I'm like, oh, I think he recorded this like probably 2 years before he recorded that, because of like how he evolved on this album. You know what I mean? And I don't know, I could be wrong. Maybe the ones that sound more evolved are older. I don't really know, but one thing KRS, I gotta give it to him. And this is 1980 motherfucking 7. Okay. People didn't have these wide variations of styles, flows, and rhyme schemes. Okay, he's rapping in a time where not long ago, hip hop, a riggedy boo. You know what I mean? Like, it was just nonsensical words at one point, a few years before this
kind of style when I choose it.
Exactly. He does rhyme schemes that are not landing on the back. I don't know what the beat is because I'm not a musician, but it's, it used to be at the end of every sentence is the rhyme word, and then you're going to rhyme the next sentence with that last rhyme word. He's going A. It was
robotic.
He's going A, rhymes where he'll rhyme like, he'll do like two things that rhyme and then two things that rhyme next to each other, but they're not necessarily landing on the 1, 2, 3, 4 beat. He will rhyme one sentence, then say another sentence, then rhyme the next sentence with the first sentence, and then the next sentence with the second, the fourth
and
sentence.
That complexity was just not around.
Not around
at all.
Just wasn't. And I think it's important to recognize that, because 87. That's why when you mentioned Criminal Minded, all I thought was 87, right? Because it's such a monumental year in the evolution of MCing. Right. Also, DJing and sampling, as you listen to the years go on, soon after this, you had Ultramagnetic MCs with their first album, Critical Beatdown, which, while they never had a truly successful career after that, that album still I think it
Dope.
got 5 mics in the source, if I'm not mistaken. It's a monumental album in hip hop, and it's so much more advanced than this in terms of its production and offbeat raps. So much more advanced. But 87, you had Run DMC, you had you had people, the popular MCs right before this. Who am I thinking of? The breaks. Curtis Blow.
Curtis Blow.
Got your hands, everybody. Do you got what it takes? It's just, it's just about having a good time, getting the party going, not really saying much.
Also storytelling rap. It was good storytelling rap.
Sure.
Still, right?
Sure.
That was the common thread. That was the part of the tradition that absolutely stayed intact.
Because it was still in the era coming off of what originally hip hop, like in terms of like the rapping of hip hop was meant for to keep the crowd going. Like it was for parties, So like like a lot of that involved. Yeah.
Totally. The original role of the MC was actually to hype up the DJ. There was a time in hip hop, a few short years before this, that the MC, his purpose or his or her purpose was to hype up and get the party going for the DJ spinning at the party. It was almost, they were the hype man to the DJ.
Which in part he's doing here, right? And probably more so and because his buddy is just his boy and he loves him, right? And has a mythology around him. And like like our friend Vlad who can fly, or our friend Sergi who's a supervillain, Just, it's right.
Totally. And this was, that was the thing in hip hop at the time. There was no, I'm an MC and I'm going to hire this mega producer and this mega producer and this mega producer, throw it all together and call it an album, which some great albums were made that way. But, that wasn't, this was you link up with your dude. He's going to make the beats. You're going to rhyme, right? So Boogie Down Productions, KRS is the only one rapping on this album. But it's Boogie Down Productions because of the collaboration between him and the DJ Scott LaRock. Also credited on almost every song is Said G of the Ultramagnetic MCs. I don't know if you saw that, but Said G was a great innovator in especially drum machine samples. Everyone went to Said and Keith for like how they could chop up Funky Drummer and other James Brown into like great sounding hip hop break beats. So so I digress. So 87, right? We're in 1987. Again, a few short years before, rap was so basic and so nursery rhyme, simplistic in its delivery. Then comes this guy who just fucks up the whole program and starts putting rhymes in places that aren't necessarily at the end of the sentence. And then just a few months later, right? I would argue an even more monumental occurrence takes place. Someone who never was the storyteller that KRS was, but the person who showed you how MCing can be done and how advanced you can get so quickly from literally, again, just simple nursery rhyme shit to, in 1987, Paid in Full comes out by Eric B. and Rakim. And Rakim, it was like he took this internal rhyme thing where, he's going to rhyme the second word in a sentence with the second word in the next sentence, but the end of the word is going to be a different rhyme that's going to rhyme with a different rhyme at the end of this. And he invented and just exploded.
Where's Kane in all this? Where?
So Big Daddy Kane again, right? So that's why I think it's so. I love looking at evolution, right? Like so. Hip hop is one of these things. It only started in 1970, like the world found out about hip hop in 1979, right? So we can really trace back all its origins. It's much harder to say who was the first jazz musician.
Oh yeah,
I'm sure we'll, someone might know, but I'm just saying, hip hop's essence started in the 70s. So we could watch something, people just figuring it out, to people mastering something in less than a decade.
This is a music genre that is by far like the biggest genre in the world. Basically, that's less than 50 years old.
Totally.
Like, it's insane. Like
so Big Daddy Kane, who again came in with slick, multisyllabic flows, rhyme schemes. He came in 1988, right? The Ultramagnetic MCs, 1988. Cool G Rap dropped in that era, and I believe his first album was 88 or 89, and he again took it to the next level. So it's just so cool to watch what happened between Boogie Down Productions, Paid in Full, and then everyone's like, oh shit, right? Between KRS's ability to flip a story and keep you captivated, control the crowd, be authoritative in your voice, and Rakim's pen wizardry and rhyme scheme fluidity and musicality in his vocals. Between those two things, right, were such monumental moments. They happened a few months away from each other, and then hip hop just blossoms. You know what I mean? I feel like everything up to that point was like, all right, I see this, I could do this, but I'm not going to reinvent it, right? These two things reinvented hip hop right here. And you could say Run DMC did too with the hard hitting, you know, is basically just drums and bass and just, but they were very basic in their rhymes. They Run DMC
very much,
you're just not going to look at them as the greatest, as people who pioneered lyricism. They weren't.
Not lyricism. They're pioneers of hip hop, but not specifically lyricists. No. And they'll be the first ones to tell you too. Like they even said, I mean, like we're all talking about the hip hop evolution. It's still fresh in my head because I'm literally watching a few episodes this morning. But DMC straight up said, he's like, yo, the minute I heard Rakim, I knew we were done. Like, as far as being like in like, you know, the mainstream but public eye or whatever. Obviously they still maintain like, you know, success since then with like, you know, the like merchandise and still released a couple albums and everything like that. But he recognized right away, it's like, yo, this is a new school. Like, we're done. We are done.
One day we should review Follow the Leader by Eric B and Rakim, which is their second album, because I think like
on the list.
I'm gonna put it on the list because everyone's talked about Paid in Full, but Follow the Leader was like they stepped up their game in every way on that next record. So
do you guys wish that the album was longer?
This album? You know what, Gary? I'm gonna argue that. So you think it just ends too quickly?
I think it ends. I think it's just long enough for me to love it and want to listen to it again, and somewhat wish there was more. But it's like it doesn't kill you with volume. It's just like, here's the essence, and that's it. That's all you get.
The only reason I wish there was more is that because that would mean there was more music made by the original duo of Scott LaRock and KRS-ONE, which would, you know, that would be my thirst for more, or hunger for more. But I think there's something to be said about an album that's just about 40 minutes. I think it's maybe less. I don't know. 45 minutes.
10 tracks.
It's digestible, especially in this day and age where, I mean, how many times have you had 45 minutes to listen to it?
Well, I was gonna say, like, just juxtaposition of an album we just did last week, Kanye. That was 22 tracks, I think. I mean, granted, like 4 or 5 were skits, and you know, you got that. And I'm not even like shitting it. I still loved it, but like this is 10 tracks, 45 minutes. It's like you get your message. Like it starts off with poetry. You got a diss track. You got a couple songs about pussy, a couple songs about weapons, and then you end it off with, you know, a title track called Criminal Minded. I mean, like it's short and sweet. I can see how you'd want more. Like I'm not, you know, arguing that. But
I mean, you do get a lot more from KRS, and like soon after this, right? Early '90s KRS was prolific, as he was later.
But you never get this KRS again. That's one thing.
No,
this was the first and only time you're going to hear KRS openly go violent and talk about hurting people and talk about like again, I use this word and I don't know what else to call it, but on the ignorant level, just like talking about guns and talking about crack hoes, and you know what I mean? Well, very soon after, he became the teacher, where it was actually the death of his DJ Scott LaRock that opened his eyes. And you know, he Dion, I know you haven't seen the episode yet, but I really can't wait till you see it. It's called this again. It's a Netflix series. Hip Hop Evolution is great learning experience and fun watch about how hip hop was birthed and where it all went. And in Do the Knowledge, which is the episode about KRS-ONE, which, you know, it leads into the conscious era. You know, not only did he birth street rap, but then he birthed conscious rap.
Yep.
Soon after.
Yo, I got something for you, Benny and Dion. I have something I think you'll both enjoy this.
What you got?
But it's I mean, what if KRS in Criminal Minded is Victor Vaughn to MF Doom? You know what I'm saying? He's a younger
All
dude.
right,
He's talking about some street
It's
stuff.
like the real version of that, where Victor Vaughn is this like made up character.
Yeah, and so is MF Doom, really.
Right. This
Yeah.
was like the not yet wizened up, enlightened version of KRS. This was his street self, for lack of a better way to put it. You know, this was him as a hungry kid in the street trying to make some money rapping. And Dion, I can't wait till you see this episode.
Yeah, no,
watching
I'm
him
watch it today.
Get excited, watching KRS tell the story of, and we should get into it now, of how South Bronx and the Bridges Over came about. Is like he's like a little boy again, almost. You know what I mean? Like you see his eyes pop up, and you see him get so excited about the story of how this came about. And I'm going to do a paraphrase here. So again, I'd say that the biggest, the most impact this album, the part of this album that has the most impact on hip hop is the two songs, South Bronx and The Bridge Is Over. Because again, like Dion said, they are the first diss tracks. They are diss tracks directed at the Marley Marl's crew. Excuse me, Marley Marl's Juice Crew.
MC Shan.
Marley Marl. I know that G-Rap was down with them, but he wasn't really. Roxanne Shante. So and as well as I think Big Daddy Kane actually became a part of the Juice Crew as well. I could be wrong about that. So you know what the way this all started is KRS and Scott LaRock hooked up with the love of hip hop. They became this duo. They were recording demos. They were recording, what they could.
Was here for 1 second. KRS was living in a shelter system because he was homeless. He was a homeless teenager in New York in the early 80s. That's crazy. Yes. Just wanted to pause and say that.
And let's take that little side note one step further. His social worker was Scott LaRock. Now that wasn't his. Yes. So Scott LaRock he was spinning at parties, and he was a DJ already, but his main source of, his main employment was he was a social worker.
Wow.
And so he's like, so what are we going to do with you? How are we going to help you? And like, what can you do for work? And KRS says, if I'm not mistaken, well, I'm an MC. And he goes, oh, you're an MC. Why don't you spit a rhyme for me? And right there, KRS just comes out and spits a verse for him. I think it might have ended up on this album too. I'm not sure, but
wow.
So and since then, he invited him to a party. Someone was dissing Scott LaRock. KRS-ONE got up on the stage and battled this guy, and since then they were inseparable. Right?
Yeah, I
have chills. I have chills on my arm telling this story.
I'm just picturing my dad was a social worker in the 80s in Bed-Stuy. I'm picturing my dad meeting one of his patients. Oh, sorry, not patients. Sorry, one of his clients, and appearing on a fucking album with them with guns and grenades. 5 years later, my dad with his 80s goatee and his glasses, just like.
Head explosion.
That's awesome.
So anyway, that's the origin, right? So they're together. They're making this. They're getting their chemistry together. They make a single. I believe it was the first track, Poetry. I'm not sure, and I want to get into that track in a bit. But so they make Poetry, right? And they're so proud of it, and they're so psyched about it, right? So Mr. Magic, I believe, is the DJ who was spinning it from Queensbridge, who was down with Marley Marl and the Juice Crew.
I know the Biggie line. Mr. Magic every Saturday, Rap Attack, Mr. Magic, Marley Marl.
Totally. There you go. So Mr. Magic, who was like the big New York radio DJ at the time.
Rap Attack.
They show up to the radio show, bust in, give them the tape, like, yo, play this. And they stand there like this, like with their arms crossed. You know what I mean? And like Marley, Mr. Magic's like, yeah, whatever. You know what I mean? And eventually they push and he plays it and he goes, so what'd you think? He goes, man, get out of here. Your shit's whack. Right? And I love this part of, again, it's on Hip Hop Evolution. The episode is Do the Knowledge. So you see KRS telling this story. His eyes go what? We're not whack. Marley Marl is whack. You know what I mean? Like he just like, what?
He couldn't believe it. Like he was appalled.
Couldn't believe it. So that stemmed the hatred. And then there was a song by the Juice Crew called The Bridge, which was, you know, there was one line where they kind of insinuate that hip hop started in Queensbridge, which is a fallacy. It started in the Bronx. We all know that. KRS being from the Bronx, and Scott LaRock made this retaliatory song called South Bronx, where he goes at them.
Well, I was actually gonna say, but before, we can get into it. Before we do though, it's funny because we think of diss tracks, to this day and age as a certain thing, right? Like we all know the Takeover, we know Ether, we know Hit 'Em Up, you know, like these some like classic, like, you know, just like hardcore diss tracks. These two songs, especially South Bronx, it's quite mild. Like,
South Bronx is light, but by the time Bridge is Over comes out, there is one line where he gets very personal about Roxanne Shante.
Yes, he does.
About other people too. He really goes at them on that. So these two tracks, that was like it. You know, there was the Juice Crew recorded response tracks that did not do well, and this was a clear cut victory and the birth of the battle track, the diss track, and like, this is how you slay someone, this is how you assassinate someone's character without anybody getting hurt physically. And again, one of the saddest and most atrocious things that happened, you know, in the next decade is that diss tracks became, you know, they would eventually turn to violence, and too many rappers have been murdered and severely hurt with things that should have just stayed on record.
I mean, right? I would like to think that, you know, thankfully, I think we're a little past that. Like every now and then, you'll hear a little bit, but I think the crux of that was like the '90s with the East Coast, West Coast. That shit got fucking scary. I mean, like even us who were like, you know, we were 10, 12-year-olds, whatever, at the time, who had nothing to do with the fucking hip hop industry. We had nothing to do with anything like that. But even us, like, there was a certain kind of tinge, like, you know, being like, yo, is that dude walking down the street? Is he wearing an LA hat? Yo, fuck that dude. You know what I mean? Like, it was like a weird kind of like vibe. It was almost like a Yankees Red Sox kind of thing, except this involved, you know, actual murders.
Do you remember we were in 6th grade, I believe, when Tupac died? Do you remember
Tupac? Yeah.
I was in Miss Babel's class when I found out, bro. So you know, it's like, I remember that moment in time thinking like, it was like almost like I grew up a little, right? Like my view into adulthood, like, oh my God, listen, the year before, I knew that major figures in pop culture could die, because the year before Jerry Garcia died, and it affected me deeply. But
not like this.
I mean, this was one of the biggest stars in the world, dead, murdered. And I remember being like, holy shit, like they could kill kill people who I listen to on the radio. Like,
just like
they
that.
could kill Tupac. Like, what? You know what I mean? We were in 6th grade. I didn't realize like it was ever gonna come to that. Anyway, crazy how far diss tracks they've spawned some horrible things. But it's also like one of the main elements and essences of hip hop is that it's competitive. And that if you got a beef, settle it on record. And you could go, and it's for the people to judge who won. This was one that I don't think anyone said, nah, Juice Crew won. This, you know, maybe people did, but this was
also like
a clear victory.
Like, we're from New York. I'm from New York. I grew up in Brooklyn. And for me, the South Bronx and Queensbridge, they're not that far apart. They're fucking neighboring places. It's just so, I mean, it ended up being not a serious beef. It ended up being, expression of feeling offended and pride being offended,
exactly.
And airing it out,
and a misjudgment of what's good, right? It's just so silly that these things get manifested and they get taken further than songs. Especially when it's like neighborhoods that are like you could drive between within 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's no other
With
Especially
no
in the-
traffic. With no
especially in
traffic. With
pandemic
traffic,
era.
maybe half an hour. Right.
During the
That-
COVID
that's
crisis, you
far
could get
enough
to the
still
South
be-
Bronx like that.
It's actually something interesting I noticed about I've been wanting to get into the violence of this album.
Yeah.
Similar to what I was saying about the diss tracks being kind of mild, the violence actually is not that bad in this overall. In fact, some of it's a little bit, dare I say, humorous. I mean, like even like
Well, yeah, it's cartoon violence.
it's
It
good,
is
yeah,
cartoon
right.
violence.
And he also does the thing that I noticed that he several times he alludes to separating battling, uh like if like he's basically saying like, yo, if you want to come battle me, like if you actually really want to battle, we're gonna bust guns. I'm keeping music separated from this. Like if you want
That's right.
to do like, you know, music sparring, we could do that, but let's not, like if you actually want to come at me and battle, you got beef with me.
I don't battle
We're
with
gonna get
rhymes. I battle with guns.
Yeah.
That felt like an Edon line. You know, that was like an
It did.
inspiration line.
It did very much so.
I
But yeah,
think-
it was on poetry. You got a line. The poetry on rattling is really not for battling, but if you want, I will simply change the program. Again, that's one of those lines where Ben, that program rhymes for something else, why it doesn't make sense. But that right there, like that shows it. It's like, yo, poetry is one thing, and I'm gonna teach you this shit. But if you wanna go the violent route, I can do that too. I can bust guns. Look at my cover. You know what I mean? Like it's
I love the beat to poetry.
Now
I think
that
it's-
song, yeah, great beat. And I would like to talk about that. That's my favorite song on the album, the first track. Now I want to talk about why. So name a song from 1987 where someone is rapping off beat like that. So that style was taken and perfected on Ultramagnetic's first album. That you know they weren't following where the snare was hitting, right? Well, there's just a do, right? That's basically where everyone was rapping on the beat. This one, man, words are falling in between the snare, in between the kick, and it's kind of musical. And that's where, and Kool Keith, maybe he heard it, maybe he was doing it already, but when you hear Kool Keith in 1988 on Ultramag, and we should review that album too, Critical Beatdown, he takes KRS doesn't do it again on the whole album, right? It's just this one song where he is completely, by offbeat, I don't mean not on rhythm, but he's not locked in to the kick and the snare. He is bouncing. He is landing in awkward pockets that make the whole experience, there's not even that, it's a sparse production, but the song sounds bigger, more full. He's not being dictated by the drums. He is accentuating the drums, and this is where the vocals become their own instrument. Before this, I wouldn't necessarily say that the MC became its own instrument. It's like someone really following the 4/4 beat and like almost like adhering to what it is, where it's directing them, where he is going, no, I'm hearing it and I'm going to make my own thing that goes along with it and follow, and it's in rhythm, but it's not on beat. That is monumental. Okay. I mean, you just can't find another song from 1987 that's like that. I guarantee you.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's perfect example.
Right?
You couldn't have come at a perfect time, and it just sounds it just sounds perfect. It sounds melodic. You know, it goes
totally. And again, so obviously it birthed the diss track, but quite frankly, I'm more impressed by that because that is taking this music that was coming up and rising to the top and becoming popular and saying, nah, man, look at what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna leave you guys scratching your head, going, holy shit. Like, why didn't I do that? Or how the hell did he do that? How did he stay on rhythm but not rhyme on the beat? You know what I mean? And then again, I feel like listening to Paid in Full right after you listen to this, is such a good experience because then you hear what Rakim.
I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna do that right after.
Listen to Paid in Full. Like after we finish this, listen to Paid in Full because you listen to what Rakim did with the same thing, offbeat flows, really musical, right? He wasn't super topical, right? He wasn't going to tell you about a story that he had. He's just going to tell you how amazing he is over and over again, right? That's what Rakim raps about, especially in the 80s. as the albums go on, he becomes more conscious. But really, it's like, I'm going to tell you how amazing I am, and then I'm going to back it up because you're never going to be able to replicate this. Very offbeat, very musical, very like his own instrument again, and very poetic. Highly recommended as a juxtaposition to this album, because Eric B's production is way more advanced.
Yeah, absolutely.
Than what Scott LaRock was doing. So it's really cool to see. Yeah.
We were saying back about switching styles just real quick. Going back to that first diss track, South Bronx, you realize that KRS switches his style to the style of MC Shan to as part of the diss. Like that was and that's another thing that like no one's even like I mean, forget about. I mean, this is a time where like we said, like everyone had one style. So the fact that this guy KRS-One comes out A, with his own style, and B, like you said, is able to switch it up to the point where he's making fun of someone. Like he's like, yo, I'm
looking how simple you're doing
before Ghost Weed.
What do you say?
I was saying this is Ghost Weed before Ghost
Weed.
Weed.
Exactly. Yeah, this is Ghost Weed before Ghost Weed. Except he saw about some whack motherfuckers. MC Shan was not whack. MC Shan was not whack. I mean, he was just saying just trying to prove his point in terms of like a diss track. But again, just going back to that switching up styles, like that's impressive. I mean, for us these days, it's like it's still impressive for us if you see someone like that's able to like mimic styles. Like like there's that comedian Ari Spears. I don't know if you remember him. Like it was like 15 years ago. He had that video where he was able to mimic like Tracy Morgan, and then like he did Method Man. Like people are able to like do these mimicking things in hip hop and like comedy, whatever. But back then, I'm sure there people were impressed. Like, oh shit, you hear what he just did? He just sound like MC Shan. Made him sound stupid, But it's again,
this album made a lot of people look silly. Really, like these two dudes, this basic low budget, non-famous people. They don't have a rep to hold. They don't have success to brag about. They're just gonna like slay everyone, and they're gonna make everyone who came before them look really stupid for a minute. And then real quick after that, rap got really competitive, right? So again, just a few months later, you get Rakim. Just a few months later after that, you get Big Daddy Kane and Cool G Rap. And that's when, to me, like, so while rap existed before this was the birth of the super MC, right? The MC is like where, oh my God, we're listening to this guy hold court. And like, I fuck with Rakim because of the way he rhymes these things. No, I fuck with KRS because of the shit he says. I fuck with Cool G Rap because of the intricate wordplay. You know what I mean? Like, that's when you start going, no, I like this guy because of how he does this. No, I like this guy because of what he brings to the table.
I guess to put it in those terms, Benny, I like KRS because he's the type of MC that comes from being able to talk himself out of a corner, out of any corner, right? He's a guy with a nimble mind. He's a guy who could tell a story, and he could do it
highly intelligent.
Whenever he needs it. In fact, he talks about it in the documentary when he's like, where I grew up, if you're, and I can't imagine a world like this, but this was his upbringing, right? Where he's like, he gets into some trouble, like, in his neighborhood, and he just starts, spitting a rhyme or just, doing something poetic to like just make the person that's messing with him like impressed or laugh or just kind of, change the course of things. He's a Mac.
He said that when he was walking around the neighborhood, people, wherever you go, if someone said, yo, spit a rhyme, then you had to spit a rhyme. And if what you had to say was whack, then they didn't fuck with you. Like, that's so sick.
I would have loved to live in a time like that. Oh my God.
I would have been beat up over and over again.
Oh man. Another interesting thing he does in this Bridge is Over. Do you guys realize that the last 10 bars is from Billy Joel song from Still Rock and Roll to Me? Did you guys realize that?
No. Oh, they still telling lies to me. Yeah.
The whole thing. Yeah. That's fucking sick, right?
Sick.
You guys didn't realize that, right?
Put that together. And other
I would have never connected those.
Dude, other MCs have paid homage to that. They've gone, you're still telling lies to me. Like, I've heard that on several other songs from the 90s.
Who would have fucking known? It was Billy Joel.
Yo,
And it was so,
can
it's
I
so
just say,
obvious too.
I think you guys both know this. Dion, you definitely know this. If you needed to ever torture me to get information that I didn't want to tell you, don't do the water drop torture. Don't physically torture me. Play Billy Joel, and I'll tell you whatever you want. Just make it stop. I can't. I respect him. I know he's an incredibly talented songwriter. I just find his music nauseating. So,
you know what else is magical about this album? Everything has been fucking pointing to it. Everything, except Billy Joel.
Everything's pointing to what? The OIM?
No,
let's.
I mean, I know we're
the name of it's the name of the show. What are you talking about?
Oh, do it yourself. Yeah.
It's the name of the show.
Okay.
Well, look, in the spirit of DIYM, for you, everything has been pointing to it. So I used to love Sublime. It was like I got really deep into Sublime when I was in, like late junior high school, early high school, and
you must learn.
Right, and it's all, and there was like an acoustic song. Right, yeah, exactly. Right, with the scratching, it's all because of KRS-ONE.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a song called KRS-ONE.
Yeah, and he totally gives all the props to him for his love of hip hop.
At the time, I'm like, KRS-ONE bookmarked. I don't know anything about KRS-ONE. It took me years to listen to this album. Who else? Dion talking about KRS-ONE, and then Stakes is High, the intro to Stakes is High, like we were talking about on the last podcast.
Take us through that again, Gary, because I love that your so view on it. Go ahead.
Man, that was something that outlined my love of this genre of music. Listening to Stakes is High on a bootleg CD that was burned with errors that I didn't know were errors, right? With the weird scratching after every song, I'm like, wow, interesting choice. Nah, not real. But it starts with different people talking about the first time they heard Criminal Minded, this album, and how it changed their life and it changed their view of music, right? It just starts with when I first heard Criminal Minded, right? Different people talking about their story of how, and stringing it together, which was a cool way to start an album and to pay homage to storytellers, right? Like this guy, who's a brilliant musician. One thing I wanted to suggest, and we don't have to do this because we are keeping things to one album on the show, but I love the way that KRS evolved his music, in the early 90s when some of our favorite music was coming out, right? During the time of like Scenario and Scenario Part 2 and our favorite Tribe albums.
Yep.
He put out some music that was such a great example of storytelling and some of his best music that I wanted to see if you guys wanted to do, as part of our outro after this episode, to give it a spin.
Yeah, totally. What song?
Something from Return of the Boom Bap, or in fact, I have one that I've just been I included in one of my recent driving playlists, right? But Out of Here, right, from Return of the Boom Bap is an awesome song.
Send it over.
Story. Yeah, no doubt.
Do you have Spotify, D?
What? Of course I have Spotify.
All right, so just
Farmer.
Wait, let's cut. We'll cut this out, but just search it.
I more meant to send the title of the song.
Okay, sorry. All right, cut that out. Cut that out.
I want no onions in my white rice.
So far, I sent you guys the Instagram handle.
Oh, I saw that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm down with that, Gary. And I think so. Did we leave anything out, by the way? I think it should be mentioned how this might be one of the origins of hip hop in hip hop, also integrating reggae phrasing and singing into your raps. Let's talk
about that for a second, real quick. Actually, that's one thing that I've always like. Even from when I was a kid, like not knowing that much about KRS and learning a little bit more as I got older, whatever. The one thing I always knew about him is that, this dude is Jamaican and he like incorporates reggae into almost all his shit. Like even the way he speaks, like, and Busta does the same thing a lot too. But KRS like very much has that Jamaican influence. And he, I believe he had a Jamaican father, American mom, but Jamaican dad. And he talks about in this album how
his brother is a Rasta. I wonder if does he have a brother? I'm not sure. Or is it his buddy? I don't know.
He could have a brother that's a Rasta. I got a cousin that's a Rasta. I mean, you don't have to be, but it's either or there. But he mentions a few times that the Bronx, had, they birthed hip hop and everything like that. And he talked about going to Brooklyn where like Jamaican cats were hanging out. And I forget what the exact line was or what song it was on. But he basically alluded to like him going to Jamaican dancehall parties, and the moment they try to play any kind of hip hop, they would run out of there with bullets. They're like, yo, get out of here with that hip hop shit. So I feel like this album like was him trying to bridge that and be like, yo, my Jamaican brethren, come meet my Bronx hip hop brethren. Let's do this together, you know. And a couple times he goes into it, whether it's the beats or his just voice inflection, his accent or whatever. He like his Jamaican and reggae influences all over this album. I love it.
That's dope. Love that.
Real live dreads with knowledge in their heads.
Yeah, exactly. Which is funny because he wasn't he was talking about like that line. I think was talking about his brother, right?
Maybe. I don't know. I don't remember.
I got it. Because it's actually part of my notes on Super Ho. Yeah. So I think he might be talking. I guess he might be talking about I don't think he's talking about himself is the point, but it's also kind of foreshadowing because later on he does become the guy with dreads that has the knowledge in his head. You know what I mean? So I mean, that's like kind of a cheesy throwaway. Obviously he's not foreshadowing, but it's like it's just like a little fun fact.
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
Self-fulfilling prophecy, exactly. Also in that song, just real quick, a lawsuit, something that I think has come up in at least once in every album that we reviewed, where these artists will end a line with a word, but sort of like twist that word up to make it like force and fit the rhyme. He does that in Super Ho, where he has a line that ends because everything that flows out of my larynx instead of larynx. Like he says larynx. I forget what the line was before that, but it was just so smooth. And again, like you hear someone talking about it in conversation, like, yo, this dude's crazy, but like it works with this. It's just like
I love that.
It's just like Nathan. It's I always bring it back to the Nathan but penetration, the Biggie line, which is my favorite like use of changing a word to make it force a rhyme. Perfect.
And I remember I heard the larynx thing too, and the next thing I thought of was Black Thought on the Do You Want More album for the Roots. He goes, my rated X larynx wrecks your context, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Good call. Good fucking call.
This album just never fails to amaze me how much it started and how much it influenced. I think we really we said it all, or I'm sure there's much more to be said, but we said a lot.
I think we've said some things that we shouldn't have even said.
I think we might have to cut some things out.
Yeah, I hope we do.
Things will get cut. Things will get cut.
So,
yeah, good.
I'd like to take us out now. I want to thank you guys for anyone listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Next week, you guys don't know this, by the way, but I want to tell you what we're going to be reviewing next week right now. So you have a week. Okay, go ahead, Dave.
Before you do, before you take it out, the one thing I just wanted to leave, my one last personal thing with Criminal Minded, I had no idea about this, but if you guys look in the Wikipedia page, they talk about the liner notes for this album. They specifically shout out my cousin on the liner notes for this album. It's on the Wikipedia page.
You want to give a shout out for who your cousin is?
For those listening, my cousin is Maestro Fresh Wes, who is a legendary rapper in Canada, out of Toronto. He's considered the godfather of Canadian hip hop.
And what's that big song? Let Your Backbone Slide.
Let Your Backbone Slide was his big hit
song.
From I believe '87, and he just got into the Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame last year. Wow. Because of that. So my cousin, like, he may not be big here, but a lot of classic rappers, like, they all know, because they're all in the same circle. Like, hip hop is hip hop. So those guys in the '80s and shit, like, they're all in the same circle. Like, one of my cousin's good friends is Chuck D. Like, he knows he knows all these movers and shakers and everything. So I wasn't surprised when I saw that, but it was like, as I was reading, because like when I started doing my research, I looked in the Wikipedia and I saw them start to say, it's like, oh yeah, in the liner notes they give shout outs to the Toronto music scene. I'm like, wait, Toronto? And then I keep going, and it's like, and it included artists such as Maestro Fresh West and a couple others. Like, yo, shit, hell yeah. So I texted him, I was like, yo, just like, I'm doing this podcast, and just discovered that you got shouted out in the liner notes for Criminal Minded, so I just wanted to drop you a line, check it on you, blah blah blah. So but yeah, that's all I wanted to say. That was like a little personal thing that
that's cool.
Awesome. So I want to, thank you guys for listening. Great time. Thank you guys, Dion and Gary. This has been the highlight of my week every week so far in this new normal. Ugh, I'm so tired of that. But this has really been keeping me sane. So next week, I wasn't even sure what we were gonna talk about next week, but all this talk about knowledge, right? I think we're going to talk, we're going to review an album by an MC with more knowledge than most, and that's the genius Jizza of the
Okay.
Wu-Tang Clan. We're going to do Liquid Swords, which
Yeah.
is my absolute favorite rap album ever made. I put it above all others in my heart. So if you're going to listen in, why don't you give Liquid Swords a spin? In my opinion, the pinnacle and masterpiece of hip hop. So we're going to talk about it next week. You've been listening to Do It Yourself Music Appreciation. We'll see you next time.
Peace.
Peace.